am Chantel Carter, the non-public ombudsman as authorized under ESSER. I have with me today Lisa Huckins, an education program specialist. We both work in the Office of Federal Programs. Our office programmatically handles questions regarding equitable services in Title I, 2A, 3, 4A, and now the Elementary and Secondary School Relief Fund, or ESSER. The Office of Exceptional Children handles non-public equitable services questions related to IDEA. Area fiscal coordinators handle non-public state funding questions related to administrative cost reimbursement and auxiliary services. If you have questions in those areas, you should reach out to the appropriate program staff. Lisa and I are going to tag team today's training, and we have some guests that we'll add at the end of the presentation. We will be monitoring the chat box, so if you have questions that weren't submitted ahead of time, feel free to type those into the chat box and we'll get those added to the end of the presentation. I am now going to turn the presentation over to Lisa.
Thanks, Chantel, and good morning, everyone. Today's discussions will mostly revolve around Title I equitable services. How should those services be provided? What options does a district have in the provision of equitable services? And what documentation will be necessary for compliance purposes? We'll also touch on ESSER Fund equitable services and finish the training with the questions that were submitted ahead of time and, as time allows, questions that are submitted in the chat box. In October of 2019, the U.S. Department of Education released updated Title I equitable services guidance. If you haven't had the opportunity to read this guidance, we highly encourage you to download and read it. It's written in an easy question and answer format, and there were numerous updates over the previous guidance. It's also a good idea to provide the guidance to the non-public schools with which you work. Many of the questions we receive in our office are questions that can be answered straight from the guidance. You can find the guidance in our CCIP document library. Section B8 from the guidance lays out the options for providing services to non-public schools. Most districts and schools use the school-by-school option. Our NPDS and CCIP systems interface to calculate and display the amount of equitable services for each private school. So if the CCIP displays $4,000 on the Title I non-public school service page for St. John's, then the district will provide $4,000 of services at St. John's. This is the way most districts provide services. Pooling within an LEA is when a non-public school decides they want to pool their Title I funds to be distributed among those non-public schools according to their need. So Columbus City is a good example of this. The Catholic schools in their area pool their Title I funds. Then, through consultation, services are provided to each non-public school based on the needs of that school rather than the dollar amount generated. Each school may receive more or less Title I services because the needs of a number of schools are taken into account. The last option is a new option that a few districts put into place this year. Pooling across LEAs is beneficial when you have a non-public school that receives equitable service amounts from several different districts. In this option, the Title I funds from several districts for a single non-public school are pooled into one pot of money. One district, usually the district where the non-public school is located, though it doesn't have to be, hires the teacher to provide Title I services. That teacher rank orders all children from each district that contributed to the pool. Children are served in the order of academic need, regardless of the district that they reside in, or how much Title I was generated by that child's resident district. It is possible that a district may generate funding and contribute to the pool, but their children not receive services. It's important to note that Title I services in the non-public setting is not for everyone. If a district did not generate a Title I allocation, then services may not be provided to children from that district. In this last option, a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, must be in place between the districts. The MOU should clearly outline the expectations and responsibilities, including if pooling across LEAs will be occurring. Without pooling language in an MOU, we would expect that the district that's providing the Title I services would have documentation to demonstrate that the $4,000 of services generated by a neighboring district was actually provided in that amount to only children from that district. We're going to take a closer look at the MOUs a little later in the presentation today. Pooling requires consultation. just like everything else in non-public equitable services. The guidance does not allow for an LEA to decide to pool funds without engaging in consultation with the non-public schools. So we're going to talk some more about consultation and kind of what we like to call the seasons of consultation. An LEA must consult with appropriate private school officials during the design and development of the LEA's Title I program. The goal of that consultation is agreement between the LEA and the appropriate private school officials on how the district will provide equitable and effective programs for eligible private school children. There are many areas that should be discussed during consultation, and we've got some of them showing here. In February, the non-public data system opens for non-publics to enter their federal participation data. During this time, districts should contact all their local non-publics to discuss possible participation in federal programs for the next year. By the time the NPDS closes in May, districts should have reviewed the non-public low-income and residence data. During this time, districts should also be evaluating the impact of their current programs and reviewing spending to make sure funds from the current year have been expended. If extenuating circumstances cause the district to not expend the full amount, they will need to consult with the non-public to plan for any funds that might need to be carried over. Once the district receives their allocation in June, they should contact the participating non-public schools and let them know the amount of equitable services that will be available to them for the next year. Knowing those dollar amounts allows for a more detailed discussion of what services will be provided and should allow the district to complete the consultation guide with a solid plan for the next school year. As the school year progresses, consultation should involve regular check-ins between the district and their non-publics to ensure that planned services are being provided and tracked, parent engagement activities are happening, funds are expended as planned, and changes to the plan are made if necessary. The consultation guide that's in NPDS is meant to be a document to capture the conversation between the district and the non-public school. The consultation guide itself does not demonstrate compliance to timely, meaningful, and ongoing consultation. We would expect additional documentation and a compliance review. Things like quarterly meeting agendas, phone logs, and emails may be used for this. Consultation guides should have been marked in progress during your initial consultations that have already happened for FY21. When your FY21 CCIP is submitted to your consultant, they will expect that the consultation guide is completed. If you're budgeting non-public funds, the only way you will know how to correctly budget them is if you've had the conversation with the non-public school. Any consultation guide that is not marked complete by the start of school will hold up the approval of your CCIP application. This year, for the first time, non-public principals will be able to mark the consultation guide non-public approved. That indicates their agreement that the guide accurately describes the programs that have been designed. So we have a non-public school that generated Title I funds. What are our district's options for serving that school? Option 1, your district can hire a properly licensed teacher to travel to the non-public school to deliver the services. Properly licensed means a regular licensed teacher, not an intervention specialist or a substitute license. The grade band and subject area must be in alignment with the services provided. Option 2, your district can hire a properly licensed non-public school teacher outside of their contracted day. This could be for services before or after school, during the summer, on days of the week that the non-public teacher doesn't currently work, or during part of the day when he or she isn't under contract with the non-public school. A non-tax license is not considered proper licensure for Title I services. Option 3, there are a number of third-party providers out there. A district could enter a contract with a third-party provider to provide Title I services. Option 4 is to enter into a memorandum of understanding with a district that already has a Title I teacher assigned to the non-public school. The wording in your MOU should clearly reflect all the expectations. If funds will be pooled, that language should be included. If funds will not be pooled, there must be fiscal documentation to demonstrate the amount of funds expended on children from your district. In all of these models, the compliance documentation comes from the service provider, not the non-public school. When you contract with an entity for Title I services, they must provide Title I documentation before the district should pay their invoices. We often get asked about the pros and cons of pooling. There are pros and cons, and it's best to engage in consultation with your non-public school as well as the districts that may be involved to determine if it may be best for you to pool across LEAs in your situation. If you're not pooling funds, your service provider should be able to provide those fiscal records and time and effort logs that demonstrate the amount of service that was provided exclusively to students from your district. This is easiest with single district tutoring blocks and determining the cost of a tutoring block based on the salary of the teacher. Funds may not be commingled with auxiliary funds or funds from any other source. It is important to realize that there is no guarantee that Title I services will last the entire year. Once the Title I funds have been expended, there are no longer funds for Title I supports. The NPDS system has a report link that will allow you to view all equitable service amounts for a non-public school. To generate this report, you would click on the Non-Public Equitable Services Report link here on the Federal Participation tab in NPDS. As you can see, the report is for a single non-public school, but it shows the Title I equitable funds they would receive from all the districts where they've reported students and have indicated an intent to participate. This report also shows the amount of Title IIA and Title IVA funds they receive from their local district. This information can be helpful when consulting with the non-public school regarding the service model that best meets their needs and options like pooling. It's also necessary information for your partners in pooling, MOU, or third-party contract arrangements. I'm going to turn the presentation back over to Chantel now, and she will talk more about MOUs, compliance, pooling, and the CARES Act.
Thank you, Lisa. Lisa mentioned using a Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, earlier. Often we get requests for a Memorandum of Understanding template. We will not provide a template because all a Memorandum of Understanding are the terms upon which both districts have agreed. The wording in your MOU should clearly reflect expectations. When will compliance documentation be provided? How often will the district providing the services invoice the other district? Will funds be pooled? During a compliance visit, we will rely heavily on the terms that were agreed to in the MOU. Remember, as the district that generates the equitable services obligation, it is your responsibility to ensure a quality Title I program is in place, regardless of whom is delivering the services. We have had compliance issues in instances where there was an MOU in place, but the district with the review was unable to produce documentation in a timely manner. This clause in a sample MOU comes right from the updated Title I guidance that Lisa mentioned earlier. Districts who want to exercise pooling should have a similar statement in your MOU. The district of service and the district of residence agree, after consultation, to pool Title I funds. Children will be selected based on uniform criteria of educational need. The lowest achieving eligible private school children, regardless of whether they reside in the district of service or the district of residence, and without regard to how much funds children from low-income families within their private school generate towards the pool, will receive Title I services. Eligible low-achieving children may receive Title I services even if their school has few children from low-income families who generate Title I funds. We've already mentioned, regardless of your delivery method, if you have an equitable services obligation, you must maintain documentation of services for compliance purposes. During a compliance review, we look for these items: multi-criterion forms for each grade level served, rank order lists. We would expect to see children from every district that contributed to the pool if you're using pooling. If you're not using pooling, we would expect the rank order list to only include those children from your district. Sample school parent compact, evidence of parent engagement, and teachers' schedules and service lists. We will also be looking at your fiscal records and contracts that you may have in place for service providers. Many of these items should be available within the first month of school. So, What is the best way to keep track of this required documentation? One district we recently worked with used a Google Drive. This particular non-public school, Portsmouth STEM Academy, had a folder for each district that generated an equitable service amount. You can see those folders here: Chillicothe, Clay, Greene, Minford. Those are all districts that have an equitable services obligation to Portsmouth STEM Academy. Multi-criterion forms, rank order lists, parent surveys, compacts are all scanned and uploaded into the appropriate folder. It should be the entity with which you've contracted for services that provides this documentation, not the private school. Another view of the Google Drive shows the view for Portsmouth City Schools. They have 2 non-public schools within their bounds. You can see them in the folders at the top: Notre Dame forms and STEM forms. Each school has a folder where the documentation is uploaded: sample household income forms, contacts at other districts that they have entered into an MOU with, parent engagement plans, school parent compacts can all be found here. Here you can see a great example of a multi-criterion form that we received from Winton Woods. This district is exercising pooling with a number of neighboring districts. You can tell by looking that children from numerous districts are on the rank order list for consideration for services. With a multi-criterion form, you have 2 objective criteria. Here we can see an Ames Web column, we can see a column for QRI, and we can see a comprehension column. Those scores are added for a total score that we can see on the far right side of the screen. These children are ranked according to their score. So when we look for children to receive Title I services, we would be looking at this form from the bottom to the top. So we have first grade in the first section. We would start with the kiddo that scored 70 and work our way up until our service list was full, and then the remaining children would be on the wait list. It is highly probable that Northwest generated funds, but because the children from Northwest score so high on the rank order list, they are not receiving services. This is allowable using pooling. Because Title I in the non-public setting is always a targeted assistance model, there still may be children in the school who are in need of Title I services, but are not eligible because their district did not generate an equitable service amount and did not contribute to the pool. Only children who live in a Title I served attendance area are eligible for Title I services. If you plan to enter into an MOU for the delivery of Title I services, this decision should be made now. When you submit your consolidated application in CCIP on July 1st, you should know who your non-public school service providers are and have started the process of getting contracts or MOUs approved. Non-public equitable services should be in place at the start of school. In consultation with your non-public schools, you should plan a program that will fully expend your FY21 service amount and any FY20 carryover. Remember, there is a 10% cap to supplies and equipment, and you must have a Title I program. You can't use all of the equitable service amount in that supply item. In addition to academic supports, Title I funds may be used for social emotional supports, parent engagement, and professional development. Plan a program to fully expend those funds in the year in which they are awarded. The language in your MOU dictates everything. Who is responsible for purchasing parent engagement materials or supplies? I would recommend the district that generated the funds being responsible for any items purchased and only entering into an MOU for actual teacher time. That way, any equipment purchased belongs to the district that generated the funds, not another district. A short note about the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, or ESSER. The equitability provision applies to ESSER funds. Refer to CCIP notes 437 and 438, now also 439 for additional information. Districts should ensure they have collected all of the necessary data to perform calculations. Many districts are using an emailed survey like SurveyMonkey or a form like Google Forms to obtain intent to participate and report low-income counts that are not reported in the non-public data system. For-profit schools are not eligible, and they may appear in NPDS. Non-chartered, non-tax schools are eligible and may not appear in NPDS. So it is very important to ensure that you are consulting with all of the schools that are eligible and within your service areas. We are going to start with the questions that were submitted ahead of time, and then we will take questions that have been submitted in the chat window. So I'm going to escape from here so I can see the chat window as well. Okay, Lisa, you're going to start with questions, right?
Yeah, we have several questions that were submitted in advance related to ESSER. So we'll go ahead and work through those. First, for payment of purchases between March 13th and the grant submission date, what is the process for non-publics when purchases were initially paid for using non-public funds?
Good question. The district should implement a process for approving these expenses. Once the district has approved the activity as allowable under the intent and purpose of ESSER funds, they can initiate the process. If the vendor has already been paid by the non-public school, the district should contact the vendor to see if the district can be invoiced. Once the district is invoiced and pays with ESSER funds, the vendor may reimburse the non-public school for their expense. We know that it is not allowable for the district to reimburse the non-public school. If the activity was paid with federal funds, those can be recoded to ESSER by your treasurer. This will be a district process, so we encourage you to include your treasurers and fiscal office in the conversation, and that you have a clear process as you are consulting with non-public schools.
Okay, next question. If a non-public would like to use funds for staffing, for teachers particularly, does properly licensed and credentialed also apply?
Properly licensed and credentialed would apply to teachers funded with ESSER funds, but it also extends to other types of staff like social workers or counselors. They should also have appropriate licenses or credentials based on the job description of that position.
This is a multi-part question, so I'm going to, I guess, ask it in each of its parts. First, with the calculation under national debate, when will funds be dispersed by ODE for services?
So the first question is, once a district completes their ESSER application, that application is reviewed by your consultant, and then it is final approved. So we have a process to get those applications approved rather quickly. Once your application is approved, you will have access to the funds using project cash requests or PCRs, just as you do in your consolidated application. There are already some districts that have access to their funds.
Will services be delayed by this in any way?
So non-public equitable services will be delayed. Once the district calculates using both approach 1 and approach 2, they will be budgeting the higher of the two on the non-public line. However, they will only be providing services up to the lower amount and only to in-district schools. CCIP Note 439 provides more information on this topic. There will be non-public schools that, because of their specific situation, do not receive funds until a decision is made. We encourage districts to maintain ongoing consultations with non-public schools and be as transparent as possible through this process.
The last part of this question, which I think you've somewhat covered, but we'll make sure, is if the lesser amount of ESSER is used for initial requisitions, will LEAs set aside the balance of the allocation to non-public services in the event a decision is made to use the ADM count?
Exactly. So basically, you're setting aside the higher amount and only providing services in the lower amount to in-district schools until a decision is made. Once that decision is made, and I will say it's being made outside of our office, it's out of our hands. Once we have received notification of which direction, your district will need to enter into a revision of your ESSER application, consult with your non-public schools so that you have the correct amount of funds budgeted in the cells that will actually be used to provide services to non-public schools.
Next, the proposed amount of ESSER funds for non-pubs is part of our total allocation, not in addition to our total allocation, correct?
That's correct. The non-public amounts are part of your total ESSER allocation, not an additional amount. That is why understanding CCIP Note 439 is particularly important. If you overspend from the non-public line before a decision is made, you may run into a situation where your public ESSER funds were used for services in the non-public setting. That will be a difficult mess.
Can allocations be sent directly to resident LEAs in an effort to streamline the requisition process if low income counts are used and multiple allocations exist for a non-public school? This would also allow for both the LEA and non-public to take advantage of bulk discount rates with supply orders.
There are no plans in place for this to happen. If the low-income approach is used, approach number 1, the rules of ESEA Section 117 would apply. This section allows for memorandums of understandings between districts, and it also allows for pooling. This is an area which you can engage in consultation with your non-public schools, but we would not recommend entering into any agreements until approach 1 is selected. If approach 2 is selected, we know that you will be providing ESSER services only to those buildings located within your bounds.
Okay, the next one is all schools will enter in budgets for the next fiscal cycle without solid plans of reopening. How will revisions be handled with respect to obvious necessary changes that will arise prior to the start of school?
So entering a revision is always an option for districts. So we know that if changes are made in the return to school plans, through timely, meaningful, and ongoing consultation, you will have the opportunity to revise your ESSER application. I've already mentioned that we've dropped a step in the review process for ESSER applications, so they should be transitioning through the process more quickly than your traditional consolidated application.
Okay, we're going to start. We have some questions about the spreadsheet that we're going to hit here in a little bit, but I'm going to start on some of the questions that have come in through the conversation here. Kelly asks, can you review the comment on equipment? Who owns the equipment?
Perfect. So we've talked about Title I services, which I think is when I mentioned equipment, but the same would be the case for equipment purchased through Title IV or ESSER funds. The equipment belongs to the district that does the purchasing. So that's why in the MOU section, I recommend only entering into an MOU for teacher time. So if you're a district and you're working with a non-public school and they want to order Chromebooks, you as the district would order those Chromebooks. They would be tagged and inventoried for the district, and they would be placed in the non-public school for use at the non-public school. They don't belong to the non-public school. If you're entering into an MOU to provide service at that non-public school, and you know they need a teacher that's going to be provided by a neighboring district, and they also want Chromebooks, it's much cleaner if you, the district that generated the obligation, purchase those Chromebooks, tag them and inventory them for your district, place them in that non-public school, and the teacher that's provided by the neighboring district is the one who utilizes that equipment with those students. That way the equipment belongs to the district that purchased it. With ESSER funds, Any equipment that's purchased and placed in the private school will belong to the district that purchased it.
Similar question along those lines. When funds are pooled across schools or across LEAs, who owns the supplies? Which district?
Right. It goes back to the language in the MOU. And that's why our recommendation is that when you're writing those MOUs, you have the discussion with the district that you're entering into that contract with. Who is going to purchase the parent engagement materials? Who will be providing any equipment or capital outlay that's necessary? The cleanest way to do it is to have the district that generated the funds purchase those items.
Next question, what is the best way to ensure that schools are missed, or that no schools are missed for ESSER funds?
Perfect. We know that these ESSER funds have been a roller coaster ride in making the determination about how services will be provided. The best way to make sure that you don't miss any schools, there's 3 places that you should look. Place number 1 is in your consolidated application under Title I, the non-public school service page. That non-public school service page will list all of your in-district private schools, and it will list all of your out-of-district non-public schools where they have selected your school as an attendance area for some of their children. So by starting with your FY20 application, we know that's where children were in March when this pandemic was declared. So that's the first place I would look. The second place that you should look to compare the list, and it should be a very, very similar list, would be in NPDS. So in NPDS, the cycle that just closed, you had private schools going in and selecting your attendance area for next year. That means they had children in their school during October count week, which is October 2019 data. So those 2 places that I just mentioned will most likely be very similar, but it's possible that they're not exact, because you could have had children leaving over the summer last year that were reported in NPDS, so they show up in CCIP, but they weren't there this October, so they're not going to be in NPDS. The third place to look is the non-chartered, non-tax spreadsheet. In February, we released a CCIP note with all of the updated non-public data system information. There is a link on there to a non-chartered, non-tax piece of guidance. You can also go to the Ohio Department of Education's homepage and type in non-chartered, non-tax schools, and you'll come to a page with the spreadsheet that lists all of the schools that are non-chartered, non-tax schools that are eligible for participation in ESSER funds. With all of that being said, our system cannot differentiate between for-profit schools and not-for-profit schools. Not-for-profit schools are the only ones that are eligible for federal programs. So it is very important as you're consulting with your schools that you ask the question, are you a not-for-profit school? We have started a list, and it's a list that we have obtained basically by asking the question and hearing back from non-public schools that yes, they are for-profit, and then we force their non-public data system forms back to correction needed with a comment that says they're not eligible for federal programs. So as you're consulting, you want to make sure that you have looked at all 3 of those places for your schools and then eliminated any for-profit schools. That is the best way to ensure that you're not missing any schools. With that being said, even if they show up in NPDS as, say, no action required, that doesn't mean they don't have low-income children that should be included in Approach 1. What that means is you should be reaching out and asking them if they have low-income children that you will add to the spreadsheet for that calculation.
Okay, Bill asks, With regard to participation, if a non-public does not respond to multiple requests to let the district know its desire whether to participate, is it the assumption the non-public is or is not participating? So if they're unresponsive, then what do they do?
That's great. And I'll address it both ways with regular federal programs and with ESSER funds. The Title I guidance is very clear that districts have the right to set deadlines with consequences. So if a non-public school comes to me in September and says, hey, I didn't enter my data in NPDS and I really want to participate in Title IIA now. That was a mistake. I missed it. And I'm going to say, have you talked to your district about it? And sometimes they say yes, or sometimes they say no. I go back to the district and I say, hey, I have this private school who now wants to participate in 2A. Did you consult with them last year when NPDS is open? And in instances where the district has said, oh my gosh, yes, I have all of these attempts, I called them, I sent emails, they were unresponsive, then I'm going to tell that non-public school, I'm sorry, the public district met their obligation for consultation. I'm sorry that you were not able to get into NPDS during the 3 months that it's open. You'll have to wait till next year for Title IIA services. Likewise, it can go the other way, right? So I go back to the district and I say, hey, I have this private school who says they didn't know. It's a new principle. They weren't aware you had to go into NPDS. Did you consult with them? Oh, we've had turnover. We've never had a non-public school before. We didn't know how to do this. Yeah, no, I don't think anybody spoke to that school. In that case, we would allow the non-public school to participate because the district didn't have evidence that they met their obligation for consultation. So as you are working now with ESSER, you know you have the obligation to reach out to all of these schools. I would definitely make sure that your contact is in a way that is something you can document. So if you are calling them because you prefer to talk on the phone, that's great. Send a follow-up email that says, as we spoke on the phone regarding ESSER funds, I need your low-income counts by June 15th to include them in our calculations, right? So then you've set the deadline, you've given them a date, you've talked about it, and that's what we would expect with ESSER funds. Any deadline should be reasonable and necessary. Reasonable and necessary is something that is left to judgment. We know we're in a pandemic. We know we're in a school building closure period. We know people are working from home. So in some cases, that means people are more responsive by email. In some cases, that means people are less responsive than email. So just make sure that you've taken that into account as you're setting the deadlines. And then if they don't respond by your deadlines, then your assumption is they are declining services and do not wish to participate.
Okay, Karen asks, can you clarify responsibilities for districts who have students who attend non-publics located outside of their district boundaries?
This is a good question, and it would be nice to know if this was related to ESSER funds or title funds. Karen, can you make a quick note to tell me which way you're thinking? Both, please. Okay. So with Title I and ESSER funds, well, I'll just say Title I first of all. So with Title I, we know that the district that generates the funds has the responsibility. So regardless of where your children are in attendance at a non-public school, whether it's in your district or out of your district, if those children live in your district and there is an amount of money that's generated for a non-public school that's outside of your bounds, it's your responsibility to choose your delivery method. So Lisa talked through earlier those 4 different ways that service can be provided. That's your choice. You can decide which of those 4 ways. It is not an automatic obligation of the district where the private school is located to provide services on behalf of every district's children that are in attendance at that school. That's not a requirement. It's up to you to determine what's the best way to provide service for your children at that school. And again, regardless of which delivery model you choose to go with, whether you can contract with a third-party provider or enter into an MOU or send your staff person over. At the end of the day, you are responsible for having all of those pieces of evidence that Title I service did occur for your children at that setting. It's clear with Title I. ESSER, it's not so clear because we don't know which approach is going to be taken. So if the low income approach or approach number 1 is taken, then everything I just said about Title I would be true for ESSER funds. If approach number 2 is taken, we know that ESSER services will only be provided to those schools located within your bounds. So the number of schools that you're providing services to will be less if approach 2 is taken over approach 1.
Okay, I think you've answered the first part of LaShawn's question already, but the second part is, are we able to charge administrative costs to ESSER funds?
You are. You are permitted to charge both administrative costs and indirect costs. So if you have the restricted approved indirect cost rate through grants management, that may be applied to ESSER funds as well. Administrative costs, what the guidance says, it should be reasonable and necessary, and we wouldn't expect a district to take a 5% administrative cost rate plus their indirect cost rate without having some manner of showing or discussing with the non-public school that it is reasonable and necessary for them to take that administrative cost rate to administer the ESSER program. Like everything else, taking those costs from the equitable service amount is something that should be discussed during consultation. Ultimately, the public district has the final say in how much costs to take from the equitable services. It's not a decision the non-public school can say, no, we don't want you to do that. Like, the public district has the right to do that. And again, they should just be in consultation talking about what those costs, what those expenses charged back to those costs will be.
Okay, Rachel has another tough one here. If non-public wants to use ESSER funds to keep staff employed, how does the LEA distribute the funds in this case? Do we make them our employees, or is this not allowed?
That's a really great question. This is the first time that I've seen this question. We do know that staff is an allowable cost under ESSER. We also know that you can't reimburse a private school. So talking through those two issues, it would have to be some sort of contract, whether it's a purchase service or an hourly contract where that teacher would be under the salary of the district for the services that it's providing at that private school.
Okay, Beth asks, is each LEA responsible for delivering ESSER-funded services individually, or is pooling an option in ESSER?
Right, so again, not knowing which approach will be taken, the guidance that was released from the U.S. Department, the frequently asked questions specific to ESSER, does address pooling, and pooling is allowed. So we can assume if approach 1 or approach 2, either one is the selected method, that pooling will be permissible.
Okay, if districts are not reimbursing themselves from ESSER funds back to March 13th for any ESSER allowable expenditures and are only using ESSER funds for expenses to open school, so new fiscal year, may the district limit participating non-public schools to the same?
So we know that the Title I guidance is pretty clear that there can't be blanket exemptions or blanket rules when you're talking about non-public schools. So this question is a blanket rule. Like, we're not doing this, so the non-public school shouldn't be allowed to do that. And the guidance does not support that way of thinking. Another way of addressing this issue, because Natalie is at Columbus, which is a very large urban district with many, many non-public schools, and the process involved that we talked about earlier about contacting a vendor, having them re-invoice, then refunding the private school, in a large system, that may be very difficult to do. So rather than saying, we're just not going to let you do it, during that consultation, you would explain the difficulties in doing it, as well as what are your true needs going into a return to school in the fall, and is there a better way to provide services using those ESSER funds than going back in time to reimburse for something.
Next question. If we are a targeted school, K-5, middle and high school do not qualify, I assume they're talking Title I targeted here, can only K-5 non-public schools receive ESSER funds, or anyone from our district no matter what grade level?
Right, Christine. So that's part of the problem with the data that we have. So we're going to get to the spreadsheets in a little bit, but the spreadsheets were created using the data we have in non-public data system. And we know that data is not complete. Many non-public schools have learned out over using the system for the past 5 years, if a district that I have a relationship with doesn't serve their high school with Title I, I'm not going to waste my time reporting low income counts for that high school because I know I won't be eligible. So many schools just don't report them because they know they're not going to participate in Title I. ESSER does not follow that. So it does not matter which buildings are Title I served, and it doesn't matter which children will receive services. We know that all children in any building where there are ESSER funds will be eligible for those services. So if you do in the targeted model like you've described, you have not provided service at middle school or high school in the past, you want to be very diligent about reaching out to the non-public schools with which you have a relationship, because there is a high probability they do have low income. They will want to participate in ESSER funds. If we go with approach 1, those counts will be necessary to generate an amount for them.
Okay, Laura asks if you can please slow down as you speak and says thank you. And I can tell Laura, I can answer this one for you. No, Chantel and I are both not capable of speaking slowly despite our best efforts, but we will try, both of us. Next question. Can the teacher use the equipment with any Title I student in that school? And I'm guessing this is back to a Title I question.
And I will answer it both ways. So if it's Title I, and we're talking about equipment purchased with Title I funds in a non-public school, which is a targeted assistance setting, that equipment may only be used with Title I identified children during Title I service time. With ESSER, we know that those funds, even with approach 1, if we are end up funding based on low income, even though the low income counts are what generates the amount of funds, the services will be available to any child and any teacher in that school.
Matt asks, is non-public funding based on all low-income students in the non-public, or only students from in the district where the non-public is located?
So the private schools should be reporting all of their low-income children to every district where those children reside. So it is not limited to only where they're located. Again, we know that we're in this situation because of a national debate. When the guidance came out initially from the U.S. Department, and in 3 releases of information after that, the U.S. Department of Education has been very clear that ADM is what we should be using. And ADM, the average daily membership or October count week data, would be for those schools located within the district. Because there's discussion about whether it's fair or not to allocate ESSER funds based on Title I status to districts, but then use average daily membership to calculate the proportionate share. That's when we saw this, okay, maybe we should use low income discussion come into play. So we know the U.S. Department is going to have a rule on this issue that will take public comment, and that's going to happen sometime this summer. We know things with the U.S. Department don't move particularly fast, but they have assured us that the rule will come before the start of school. I'm telling you all of this because I can say what the rules of Section 1117 are. Section 1117 says that low-income children generate the funds, and the funds follow the child to the school where they're at. So if ESSER goes with approach 1 and they follow the rules of Section 117, then each district would be generating funds for every non-public school where their low-income children are enrolled.
Sue's question is one that you've already addressed about, do we count just the low-income students from served grades like we already do with Title I, or would we also be looking at, the high school kids? And so I think we've addressed that.
Yes, but let me add something here. So we know that we have to collect all of the low-income information. I received a question yesterday from a district about CEP. So if you are a district that participates in the community eligibility provision, the spreadsheets that you have your direct certification count with the 1.6 multiplier already included. So your counts would technically be the same as including both free and reduced priced non-public counts from NPDS. So if you do participate in CEP, know that we have already included that multiplier in your low income counts.
Okay, Matt asks, for ESSER funds, do non-pubs consult with all districts that have students in the non-pub, or only the district where the non-pub is located?
So again, that's what makes this so difficult, because approach 1 and approach 2 are very different. If approach 2 is taken, you only have to consult with those schools that are located within your boundaries. If approach 1 is taken, then you have to consult with all of the schools, whether they're located in or out of your boundaries. So in your consultation, that has to be part of what your language is, right? If you're a non-public school located outside of my district, I'm going to say to you, we don't know if approach 1 or approach 2 will be taken. I'm going to collect your low income counts, and I'm going to calculate an ESSER amount for you, but you may not get that from me if approach number 2 is taken. So again, you want to be transparent. You want to have some consultation with them, because you have to know, do they want to participate, first of all? Do they have low income counts to report to you if they haven't? And if they say, yes, they want to participate, yes, they have low income counts, what are they thinking their needs are going to be? Because if you're going to submit your ESSER application with the larger of the 2 calculations, you kind of need to know where you're going to put that. Are you going to put it in supplies? Are you going to put it in purchase services? And without some kind of consultation, you won't have an idea about how to do that.
Okay, LaShawn says, I understand that we have the right to set deadlines for the ESSER funds, but there has been so many changes that it's difficult to set deadlines with information coming out every Friday.
100% agree. And again, if you've been following this closely, I'll recap it from where we sit. When the law came out, Ohio was very much on the ball, and we said, the law says low income, NPDS was still open, we extended the window, we put information out there like, everyone that wants to participate in ESSER, you need to go into NPDS and report all of your counts. It was beautiful. We have a system for that. It could have been easy. That was on a Thursday, and our CCIP note came out at 4:30. By 5:30, we had the guidance from the U.S. Department saying, even though the law says Section 1117, it's really going to be best to calculate proportionate share based on ADM. So then we had to turn around and put out another CCIP note that said, okay, we're going to use ADM. And we worked really hard, got that out on Monday with the estimates. That was CCIP note 436, that's now archived because it's no good at all. Because by Tuesday, this had become a national topic of conversation, and now states were not sure which way to use. So then CCIP Note 437 came out that said, hey, there's a national debate. We have approach 1, we have approach 2. We don't know which one. We don't know how long this is going to take. So I guess we're going to do both. And at some point, somebody will tell us. So I completely understand that information has been changing and coming out weekly. So that's our attempt at being transparent. As soon as changes have happened at the national level, we have responded and responded very quickly to get the most up-to-date information out to you. So setting deadlines is important. We know at some point we're going to have a decision which will, again, cause a change in consultation with all of these private schools again to either say, yes, it's approach 1, let's be final now, or yes, it's approach 2, let's make our decisions. So we know it's going to happen at least one more time. Recognizing that, LaShawn, what is going to happen when your ESSER application is reviewed by your consultant? Those districts that have non-public obligations will be uploading your calculation spreadsheets into the system. Those will be looked at by your consultant to see if they appear right. With your consolidated application, your consultant knows for sure if you budgeted the correct amount because we calculate that amount for you. ESSER is not going to be that way. So there is an assurance on the application that says the district is doing what they're supposed to in terms of their non-public obligations. And your consultants will very likely put a comment in that reminds you that you should be consulting and providing equitable services as required. I'm telling you that because as a district, depending on how well your consultation has gone, how much data you have, when you submit your application the first time, you might not have all your data. You might find out 3 weeks from now that you have additional non-public counts at a school that you weren't aware of that you choose to include in a revision. And that's okay.
Okay, we're going to take a couple more questions, and then we're going to try to get time in here to look at those spreadsheets because we had a lot of pre-submitted questions about that, and I know it's really confusing for people learning all this new stuff. So we want to make sure we leave some time for Daphne to come in and show us that information. So is admin funds from ESSER different than Title I when it comes to non-public, like before or after allocation is the next question.
That is a great question, Yohavid, and I'm not sure I know the answer to that. The first place to look would be in that guidance that was released from the U.S. Department. We know that with Title I, the equitable service amount is taken off the top, and then the administrative costs are either applied to the non-public portion or the public portion, and that's two separate cost objectives. With ESSER funds, my feeling is that because the U.S. Department guidance has them being calculated according to ADM, then it seems like it would be off the top under one cost objective, but I don't have the answer to that one.
I want to get Sandra's question in here because it's a little bit different. Does the non-public document the low income status of students? And if so, what documentation is required? If the ADM count from last October is being used and there was no surveying of family income at that time, how does the non-public document something not done in October?
Perfect. So we have definitely emphasized in our guidance to the field that the counts, the low income counts, should be from October. So we have had instances where there are children on Ed Choice scholarships that we know were enrolled on a scholarship in the fall. That income level is verified, and the private school would just need to look at the low income chart, maybe the Ohio Household Income Verification Form that's in NPDS, and ensure that their income from the Ed Choice verification falls into one of those free or reduced brackets. Just because you have a child on an Ed Choice scholarship does not necessarily mean they would qualify in the income brackets for free or reduced lunch. So you shouldn't take it as it's an Ed Choice kid, it's low income. There's not that one-to-one equation. We also know that some private schools have that as part of their enrollment information. So if they have enrollment information from the fall, again, you're just going to apply it to the chart to see if they are low income. We also have schools that did not collect this information, which I think is what you're talking about. They didn't do the survey. So the survey can still be filled out, but the family should be reporting where they were in October. We know that in the current economic times that we are, many, many more people are out of work and would potentially qualify for low income now than they were in October. So as you're working with your private schools, if they're trying to collect this data, you want to make sure that they are doing it from the appropriate time period, which is October.
I'm going to do one more question here, and then we'll go ahead and turn this over to Daphne and let her do some screen sharing. LaShawn asked, which approach should we use to submit our application when allocating funds?
So CCIP Note 439, which is the last one that came out on Friday, talked a bit about this in detail. So you are instructed to calculate both ways. So in your consultation, you're going to be working with your non-public schools, and you're going to say if approach 1 is taken, it's X amount of service. If approach 2 is taken, it's X amount of service. When you budget in your actual application, you're budgeting the higher of the two. For some districts, the higher of the two will be ADM. But if you're a district that has no private school located in your bounds, but you have Title I services going outside of the district, your highest amount will be approach number 1. So it depends on the district, but you're going to budget the higher amount to make sure that you're covered until a decision is made. Then you can do a revision.
Okay, thank you, Daphne, for answering some of the questions over here in the chat. I see that also. We're going to go ahead and let Daphne kind of walk us through some of this spreadsheet and calculation information. Like I said, we did have several pre-questions submitted about that topic, and I think her walkthrough should cover most of those. But after you've kind of seen where she goes with this, then please submit any additional questions over in the chat feature, and we'll take a look at those after she's shown you the information and kind of walked through things.
Thanks, Lisa. And Lisa, feel free to chime in after I do an introduction if there's any questions already submitted that I miss while I'm going through the basics. Okay?
Yeah, I'll keep an eye on the chat and let you know the questions once you're done with your demo here.
All right, thank you. So
Thanks,
I do want to reiterate, as Chantal has mentioned, you as districts, you're being tasked with a rather complicated calculation here. Typically, our office likes to provide estimates when possible for things such as non-public equitable services, but because of not only the pending decision we're waiting on, but also because of the consultation still needed to be done with your non-publics, we have tried to come up with tools to assist you while you're doing these calculations. So these tools are going to be complicated because this is complicated calculations, unfortunately. So please, as you're working with these tools, feel free to reach out to your consultant, reach out to those of us in the Federal Programs Office, because we are more than happy to help you with them. We know they are not easy because these calculations, unfortunately, are not easy. So you should see my screen right now. This is the calculation spreadsheet. There is a separate spreadsheet that just has the districts and their data. The calculation spreadsheet does have the districts and their data, but it also has the calculation table. So when you open this from the ESSER page on the non-public section, it'll open to the instructions first. And so here, the instructions will tell you first how to filter the data so that you may see your non-public schools and your district information. Then if you scroll down, it'll also include the instructions for these tables. In order to read all of the instructions, go ahead and double click inside the instruction box, and then you'll be able to scroll through the 5 pages. This was the easiest way to include the instructions here in the Excel sheet, so I apologize for kind of an unusual way to provide instructions, but I did want to show you all how to read the entire instruction sheet. Okay, so now that you're familiar with how to access the instructions, I'll show you step by step how to filter the calculation sheet for your districts. So first I'm going to go to Calculation Approach 1 tab, and you'll see it opens up to the actual table. Now if you scroll all the way up, that'll be every district and their associated non-publics. This is the Title I low income count format that Chantel was mentioning. That's what we consider Approach 1. So right here, I'm coming up to the district name. And so if I was to click on that little arrow and then type in a district, it will show me that district and its non-public school. You can see that here on my screen. Sometimes there's a screen lag, so I'm going to pause here and make sure it's showing. Lisa, is everyone able to see this now?
Yes, we can see your screen.
Okay, great. So this provides the district IRN, the district name, the district low income count, and then it goes to the non-public IRN, the non-public name, the low income count that the public district has of the non-public building, and then there's a total supplied here. Now, you'll notice there's a gray line because these columns do not continue all the way across. Part of the complication in this calculation is that we need to do basically a separate table within the table in terms of district information. So now I'm going to unfilter from that particular school, and we'll take a look at what happens on the other side of the gray line. So it appears that this might be blank. It actually is not, because if we scroll all the way back up, we'll see that the information is here. This table does not have non-public specific information. It has one row for a district, and that is it. The other side of the gray line, there is a row for every single district and its non-public. So there are many more rows on the other side of the gray line. So please do not read straight across. Go ahead and find the district IRN that you are interested in. So here I'm going to filter again, and I'll pull up Akron. And you'll see it gives me one row for Akron with the sum of its low income count for non-public buildings, and then the district low income count and the income counts. This information is going to be important when you are verifying that the list on the other side is complete with all your non-public information. And I'll show you how to take a look at that now. So right here, I'm going to go ahead and filter for Akron. You can use these checkboxes, or you can type here in the search bar. I could have typed Akron, and then it'll pull up Akron and all of its associated non-publics. So if I'm Akron and I say, okay, I want to know how much I need to possibly set aside for Approach 1 in non-public equitable services, I'm going to take my IRN and type it in a yellow box. Then I'm going to hit enter. And what it'll do for you after you type that is it'll show you your district allocation. It'll show you your counts. It'll show the share here, the percentage that goes to non-publics from the district allocation. And then it'll show you the total, which will be spread across these non-publics on the list. Now, the important thing about this sheet is that in your consultation, you'll need to know if there are any non-participating non-public schools. So once you have that, let's say Akron had St. Joseph here with 4 kids and Sacred Heart of Jesus with 1 kid, and these 2 schools decided they are not participating at all. That means we have a total of 5 low-income students who will not be participating because their schools are not participating. We're going to take that total and put it in the second yellow box. What the sheet does for you is subtract that from the total non-public count, and then it gives you the PPA for your participating non-public schools. So this is an important piece to gather while you're doing your consultation, is what is the sum of those students from non-participating non-public schools in your list. Now the last piece of this table, and then I'll stop and see if Lisa has some questions for me to go over for this table and this sheet so far, is how do I know exactly which amount goes towards which of my schools? And you do that by entering the school's IRN. So I'll come back up here to Akron. The Redeemer Lutheran School is 060368. So I'm going to enter that IRN in here. 038. And you'll see it gives you the school name. It gives you the current count. And then here it'll go ahead and use the PPA in order to generate their non-public school equitable service amount. That is if approach 1 is going to be taken. Okay, so with that, I'm going to catch my breath. And Lisa, if there are relevant questions I can highlight real quick, I'll go ahead and talk about that for approach 1.
Well, it looks like Chantel's been catching some over here on the left and responding, but there's been some questions about column H, kind of the things that happen on the other side of the gray line. Some people are having trouble pulling it up on their own and just want some kind of revisit that that side of the spreadsheet. So maybe if you could take a little tour over there. The other thing that's coming up is adding it and taking off schools that aren't appearing on the spreadsheet. So that would be something we can look at next, maybe.
Okay, that sounds good. We will first start with how to look for column H. So my recommendation is to first go and make sure there are no current filters placed on anywhere on your spreadsheet. So I'm going to unfilter Akron right now, because if there are filters, it is likely that it will not show anything in column I, J, K, etc. So as you can see, I undid that. And now there are no filters on my sheet. I'm going to scroll back all the way up to the top. And once I get to the top, I should now see the district information starting in column I. So if someone was maybe having a little difficulty trying to find that information, just please type in the chat box if those steps helped. If not, it may be worth maybe just emailing me, and we can make sure that I get you a good explanation as to how to. Okay, so now let's talk about adding a school. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and scroll back over. So when you add a school, I would highly suggest that you reach out to your consultant, because although we have steps for you to do it, it is very easy to miss one of the steps and then end up not doing it correctly. So I apologize that it's not going to be a really straightforward method, but again, unfortunately, we had to give you a rather complicated tool in order to do this calculation. I do want to quickly, though, show you the basic steps. That way, if your situation is maybe a little more straightforward, you can try to do that yourself. And if not, again, please reach out to your consultant. So what I've done here, if I'm a Dina local and I need to add an additional school, that is not included on this low income version approach, then first I'm going to go ahead and filter for Adena local, simply, honestly, because it's just an easier way to keep track of the information. It's not necessarily a magic button. And then right here, I'll go ahead and start by doing district IRN 049494. And then I'll do local. The count for the district should stay the same because I am only adding a non-public. You'll do the IRN in the next box. We'll do the non-public name. Now, as the public district, they've given me that October number. And so let's say there are now 2 students from this new school. Now, when you get to column G, please go up to that number, copy it, and then paste it. Column G is a formula based on the other table. So this one will update for you automatically. So please do not update it yourself. Okay, so now I have a new school added. The next thing I'm going to do is update on this gray side. So in order to read the gray side correctly, I'm going to unfilter. So now all schools are going to be on there. And I'm going to scroll over to column I. And now I will search for Adena's information, 049494. And now that I see this here, the first thing I'm going to update is this sum. Instead of 0, because of my new school, we have 2. And so that will automatically update column L for me. So once it does that, now my other side is completely updated. I'm going to unfilter this. And now I'm ready to use my table now that I've added it in there. And just for ease of viewing, I'll go ahead and put the filter back on for Adena as we go ahead and look at what happens to the table once we've added this new school. Okay, so let's see how it did with the update. I'm typing in the IRN here for the district. The low income count is now listed as 2 instead of 0. We have 0 for non-participating non-public schools. We have a total of 2. And now I'm going to enter in the new IRN that I made up for the new school. Got the non-public count. And so now I know what the equitable service amount is. Okay, so that was a quick overview as to how to add a school. Again, please feel free to reach out to me or your consultant, because although you can certainly do this with our instructions, it is easy to miss a step or do a step out of order. So we are happy to help you with that. Okay, with that, I'm going to not undo this. So my sheet does not include a mystery school. So I apologize for all of this typing. Okay, Lisa, so that was a quick look at adding a school. Are there any questions, or should we go ahead and take a look at approach 2?
Chantel, do you have any questions over there that you haven't already caught? I think it looks like all the rest of them have been captured, but I could have missed one back and forth in there.
No, I think we're good. I think we should go on to approach 2. We have about 10 minutes left.
Perfect.
Okay, thank you, ladies. So approach 1 is based on low income counts. When we look at approach 2, you'll see it's perhaps a little more straightforward because it is only based on in-district schools and ADM. There's no non-participating school numbers to subtract here. The process is going to be similar, though, where you will want to filter for your district, see if the school list is correct. So let's go ahead and review how to filter. I'm going to come up to the district name. Let's say I want to look at Alliance. So I'm going to click the button for Alliance, hit OK. There is only one school listed for Alliance. And here we can see the setup is similar. I have my district IRN, my district name. This time it is total district enrollment. I have my non-public IRN, then my non-public name. It is again total non-public enrollment. And then here we have a sum of total enrollment, public and non-public. The gray line that shows you this is not a continuous list. So now while I look for Alliance, I'm going to again unfilter, and then I'm going to look for the Alliance IRN here in this column. So I'll slide back over. I'll take off this filter here. So all the names again appear here. I'm going to come over to district IRN. I'll look for Alliance City. And we see that it has our district IRN for Alliance. It has the sum of the non-public enrollment. It has the district enrollment, and then it has the total student enrollment. So the calculation table is going to pull from these various columns. So let's take a look at how the calculation table is used. Before I do that, I'm just going to unfilter so it doesn't look unusual there. And now we'll scroll down to the very bottom of the list for the table. This table is, we tried to set it up in a similar fashion so that you're using IRNs again in order to have calculations generated for you. So here, if I were to put Edgerton local, that would be 050617. And this will give us the district allocation again. And then the total non-public equitable share. Here's the PPA for non-public schools in the Edgerton district. And now I'm going to enter in my non-public school so I can see what the equitable service amount is going to be for St. Mary's. So that's 059170. St. Mary's is going to appear now with their count of 76. Now, because this district is small and only has one non-public, obviously the entire amount for the non-public equitable share is going to St. Mary's, but this will give you the amount based on if you have a district with, say, 2 or more, it'll split that up for you automatically. Okay, so with that, what questions do we have, Lisa, about calculation 2? I know you all will you and Chantel will probably want to do some closing remarks, but I can try to answer quick questions for this table.
One question we had was, do we need to do anything with the data spreadsheet linked in the CCIP? So once they complete the spreadsheet, what do they do?
Sure. So you do not need to do any anything in the data spreadsheet if you do not want to. I find it easiest to just go to the calculation spreadsheet because the information in terms of the non-publics and the district is the same. But we know that some districts would want to only look at what their data is without having the complicated table attached to it.
Excellent. Let's see.
And Lisa, I do want to mention, if you have looked at the data and don't see the table, it could be that you are only in the data spreadsheet and you have not opened the calculation spreadsheet. So try reopening the calculation spreadsheet and scrolling all the way down.
And they do upload these once they've calculated, is that correct? They upload them into CCIP or save them?
Yes, I don't know if maybe Chantel has specifics on what they should actually capture here, but you would not need to upload, let's say you have 10 non-publics, you don't need 10 spreadsheets there. I'm sure there's a different way to list individual amounts.
Right, and one of them will show us the full equitable amount so that we can see that that is budgeted in the budget, so that should be fine. Let me see what else we still have here. And again, if your question isn't answered before 11:30, we will go ahead through the chat and keep responding to questions that are coming in. There are quite a few. Let's see, approach 2 will only apply if you have non-public schools located in your bounds. And that would be, yes, they wouldn't have an ADM for a school if it wasn't in their bounds. Another spreadsheet.
I think that we have addressed all of the questions from the side. The specific questions about I can't get the file or the cells aren't showing up yellow, those would be good kinds of questions to email us, and we can work with you to make sure that you have the file that is working. Again, Daphne's information was provided on the side. Your consultant in the Office of Federal Programs should be your first go-to, and then Lisa and I are here as well for the programmatic piece of it, actually providing the equitable services. Like Lisa said, we will be here if there are additional questions in the side, but as we mentioned at the beginning, this webinar is recorded and will be put into the CCIP as a resource if you need to come back and revisit or look at the demo of that spreadsheet.
Thanks, Daphne, for going through all of that for us. And again, as Daphne said, we understand that it's complicated. The directions are very helpful and do step you through, but if you're working through those and still frustrated, don't hesitate to contact us and we'll help with that. Chantel, do you have any other final information? Again, we'll keep answering questions here on the side and we won't completely shut down, but for those of you who need to head on to your next thing, we want to make sure we're timely.
I don't have anything additional to add, but there are some questions in the side. So Barb is asking which spreadsheet do we need to upload? It would be the completed calculation spreadsheet, and that's how your consultants will know if you have budgeted the amount that you have calculated according to that spreadsheet. We'll also look at the spreadsheet to see if there are anomalies. So for example, if we look in CCIP and we notice that you have 20 schools, and 18 of them are not participating in Title I, and when we look at your ESSER file, you haven't included any of those 20, that's going to be a question for us. Like, did you reach out to all of the schools to make sure you had all of their low-income data? But otherwise, ESSER is very much, this responsibility is on the district to make sure you have the data that you need, to make sure you've done the calculations with the tools that we've provided, make sure you've budgeted the appropriate amount and put those services into place. Amy asks about ESSER needing to be wrapped up before the school year starts next year. So are you talking about the length of time that these funds are good for, or actually submitting the application before the start of the 2021 school year? If you could type in the chat box to clarify the question, we can answer it. Rachel, in the meantime, ESSER services are for all children in the school, children and teachers. It's not limited to the low income, and it doesn't matter which approach. With both approaches, we would expect the services to extend to all children. Bernadette, ESSER funds are a little bit different in that they're very, very flexible. So that 10% limitation on supplies and capital outlay that we see in Title I does not exist for ESSER. Again, you would just want to make sure that the intent and purpose of the activity is in alignment with the grant, so those limitations aren't there. Matt, the low income numbers that appear in the spreadsheet are from NPDS. We know those are not complete numbers, which is why we are encouraging you during this consultation period to collect any additional low income counts that may not have been reported in NPDS.
Chantel Holly asks, can you consult with non-publics before having the actual amount of both approaches?
So you can. This was a discussion that someone was having on the side a little bit earlier. It's definitely helpful to have some numbers so that you have something to base your consultation on. When we released our estimates in CCIP 436, which were based on ADM, we included everyone until they opted out. And we said these are estimates. So if schools were going to opt out or there were non-chartered, non-tax schools to include, that would impact those estimates. So you're going to calculate it both ways. So you might as well include that in your discussion with them. And then if schools decide not to participate, of course, part of your consultation is the amount will change because they're estimates. Sandra, you are correct about your statement. If a non-public indicates that they want to participate, but they don't have low income counts, if approach number one is the approach that is decided upon, they would not have an ESSER amount with your district. Only if approach two was taken, because that is the approach that's based on the number of children in the school.
And Rachel asks, can you remind us where the recording is going to be saved for if they wanted to re-watch the recorded training?
In the document library, there is a section for the CARES Act and ESSER funds, and it's divided into U.S. Department documents, ODE documents, and then OFP. So this would be something that would be housed in OFP, the Office of Federal Programs portion of that document library.
And Lisa asks, are non-public schools allowed to use ESSER funds for FY20? So that March 13 to now time frame.
So they are. The substantially approved date for this grant is March 13th. So if you have expenses at a non-public school that happened after that date, you will want to come up with a process for reimbursement. It is unallowable for the district to reimburse the non-public school. However, you could get the vendor to invoice the district, and the vendor could then refund the non-public school any expenses they had that would be allowable under the ESSER funds.
Chantel, Sarah asks, what if the non-public has a way to identify the non-public low-income counts and they just haven't done so? How long do they have to gather that information for ESSER?
So we would encourage the district to set deadlines that they believe are reasonable and necessary. And we also know that districts have the opportunity to revise their applications. And we know that we still at this point don't know if approach number 1 or 2 is going to be taken. With all of that taken into account, you can perhaps be a little more lenient in schools that have never collected this data before, because there's a learning curve there that's a lot different than schools who are used to reporting non-public schools. And if your equitable service amount that you calculate changes between revision 1 and revision 2, you can post a history log note to explain we've had additional low-income data reported by this school that's never reported data before, so we're updating and revising our equitable service amount. You just want to make sure that you are doing things that are reasonable and necessary and being as flexible as possible, since that is the intent of these funds.
Lisa asks, if a non-public receives funds under option 1 but not option 2 and option 2 is chosen, then what happens to any funds they may have used in FY20?
That is a great question. I would definitely encourage you to take a close look at CCIP note 439, the CCIP note that came out on Friday. That one explains how when you are budgeting these funds, you are budgeting the higher amount. But when you're providing service in this period where we don't know which approach will be taken, you should only be providing services based on the low income amount to schools that are located within your bounds.
And Rachel's question for approach number 1, are we including only low income count within our district boundaries?
Approach number 1 requires you to collect and use low income data regardless of where the non-public school is located. So you will be reaching out to the non-public schools where children who live in your boundaries are attending school, just like Title I.
We don't have any more questions right at this moment, but we would like to thank all of you who have participated for being with us today. Hopefully you got some information that'll be helpful to you. Certainly if you have more questions after this, don't hesitate to reach out, and we'll stay on here for a little bit longer in case some more questions come to mind.
All right, thank you, Daphne, for the demo. Thank you, Lisa, for participating in our training today. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to get on and learn some more about equitable services and this new grant program that we have to roll out. Like Lisa said, if you have questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us, and this recording will be archived in the document library.
Chantel, I just saw one more question come in. James missed the response earlier. Are we only collecting low-income data for students that would typically be served under Title I, or all low income?
James, you would be collecting for all low income. ESSER funds is not related to Title I service, so we would want to make sure that we have all low income counts. All right, so thank you guys very much. I'm going to go ahead and stop this recording, and everyone have a great rest of your day.